Listen close. Imagine the air suddenly growing colder, the light from your lamp narrowing to a sliver, and the sound of the world shrinking into the wet, slow echo of stone. Caves are quiet places, but they are never peaceful for long. The stories you are about to hear are not horror movie set pieces. These are real moments where curiosity met danger, where ordinary choices had extraordinary consequences, and where rescue teams and everyday people faced impossible conditions to bring someone back to the surface. Before we begin, if you love mysteries of the underground and real survival stories, subscribe now so you don't miss more investigations like this. Stay with me until the end. I promise the last question will change how you think about exploring. The first story begins with the human impulse to see what is hidden. A group of women followed a man who owned the land into a cave that had been his pride. They moved with the same mixture of excitement and carefulness every caver understands, headlamps sweeping, knee pads scraping, breath shallow in confined passages. Deep inside, beyond a narrow crawl, the passage opened into a room that, according to the owner, had never been seen by another human. 3 women took the tight crawl and waited beyond it while the owner, bigger than the opening, decided to make things easier for himself. He worked the rock with a hammer and chisel, chipping at the ceiling to widen the crawl. At first it felt like gentle progress. Then the cave reminded them it was not a place for arrogance. The rock the owner loosened did not fall in small, manageable pieces. The ceiling's fragile balance gave way. A rumble filled the chamber and the crawl was instantly sealed by a mass of broken stone. What had been a promising day of exploration became a trap. Imagine being on the other side of that collapse, pressed together in a space too tight to move, with only the small cone of your lamp to say the world still exists beyond the rubble. The trapped women did what people who understand caves do, they stayed calm and conserved heat. Above them, the owner worked frantically, trying to chip a hole through the blockage, but the collapse would not yield to alarm and speed alone. He accepted a hard truth: a proper rescue would require other hands, proper supports, and time. Outside, rescuers gathered with tools the cave had never asked for until that moment. They did not rush recklessly at the rocks. They understood that moving debris in a confined, unsupported passage could trigger further collapse. So they did the slow, patient work of shoring. Mine workers who knew how to cut timbers for support helped cavers and rescue personnel construct coffers and braces to hold the unstable rock in place. Through the narrow space that remained, rescuers passed food, water, and blankets, and a small heater to stave off hypothermia. That simple act, passing care through a crack, turned fear into endurance. By late evening, after patient shoring and careful chiseling, the opening yielded. The 3 women emerged shaken but in surprisingly good spirits, and the lesson the rescuers left with was simple and brutal: never alter a passage while people are still deeper in a cave. The next story moves from human curiosity to a mother's instinct in an unpredictable landscape. On a volcanic island where the ground is pocked by tubes and pits left by ancient lava, a woman walked with 2 young dogs. At some point they slipped away, as puppies will do, and disappeared beyond the lip of a rocky ridge. The woman called and searched without success. When the light thinned and a faint whimper answered from below, she found a small opening that led into darkness. She tried every practical option she could think of. She lowered a belt. She called for help, but the phone had no signal. The whimpering pulled her toward a ledge inside a lava tube, and she made a decision that came from the heart. She attempted to enter the tube to reach the puppies. The opening was far narrower than she had estimated, the walls smoother and more unforgiving than they looked in daylight. She slipped and became wedged upside down, her weight and the shape of the tube trapping her in a position that allowed her to reach the animals but not to move. The image is heartbreaking, the danger of being close enough to touch a loved one and powerless to help. Hours crawled by. Blood pooled in her head from being inverted, the body's systems faltering in a confined space where circulation and breathing were compromised. When rescuers eventually reached them the next day, the woman was barely conscious. The puppies were alive but frightened. Tragically, the woman did not survive. Her last words were for the animals she had tried to save. This story reminds us of how small mistakes and misjudgments near fragile terrain can have tragic results, and why emergency services and reliable signals are essentials when you are in remote landscapes. The third account involves experienced explorers who thought they knew a cave like the back of their hands. They had rigged ropes and descended into a shaft that opens to a chamber of rock-strewn floors and narrow exits. On the way out, one of the men slipped on jagged boulders and fell into a crevice. He did not tumble far enough to die, but he landed wedged between rock faces with his legs trapped and his back pressed to cold stone. The immediate fear was not just for his discomfort, any wrong movement might have worsened a spinal injury. His companions did what they could. One stayed to calm him, trying to prevent shock and hypothermia, the other went out to summon help. Rescue teams found him hours later and faced a delicate choice. They could try to widen the crevice themselves, but there was always a risk of displacing stones that could injure him further. So they used tools carefully, frequently stopping to check his condition. They worked the rocks free bit by bit and, once the opening allowed it, freed him onto a stretcher designed for confined spaces and brought him to the surface. He recovered after medical treatment for cold exposure and bruising. The rescue illustrated something crucial: even with experience, caves will always present unpredictable hazards, and the best outcomes come from measured, patient extrication. Another pair of brothers sought a test of courage in a fissure barely big enough for a person to squeeze through. The younger brother insisted on exploring a skinny crack. He pushed himself into the narrow space, twisting his body through a long run of stone, until a weak section shifted under him and his foot slipped. Trapped between rock faces, he could not move his legs into a safer position. Below him, his twin watched helplessly, too far back to reach the stuck body. Panic rose, then clarity: someone had to leave the cave to get trained help. Park rangers arrived and realized they could not simply yank the trapped boy out. Instead, they improvised a mechanical advantage. They fashioned a loop of webbing, dropped it down, and with careful coaching got the trapped boy to place the loop beneath his arms. Using a controlled haul, the rescuers inched him upward, pain cutting through every movement. Inch by inch, under gentle instruction and steady pulling, they freed him. He walked away bruised but alive. This is the kind of rescue where calm voices and a practiced pulley system mattered more than heroics. There is a story of a group who mistook a chain of deep pits for entertainment and acted with appalling misjudgment. They brought gasoline to an isolated field full of sinkholes and poured it into a fissure, then ignited a rag and threw it in. The fissure erupted, expanding into a yawning chasm and blasting rock and soil into the air. One man was standing too close and was thrown into the newly formed hole. He fell a great distance and landed in a narrow seam of rock, where a slab of stone crushed him beneath it. By the time rescuers arrived, the man lay trapped under a heavy slab, unable to move and struggling to breathe. The rescue became a slow, manual operation. Teams chipped around the edges of the slab, used mechanical advantage to lift and lever the rock, and gradually dug him out by hand. They rigged a tripod and pulley to raise him once the immediate hazard had been reduced and stabilized him as best they could inside the narrow shaft. The extraction took hours and required careful packaging to avoid worsening his injuries. He survived, but with broken bones and other injuries. The rescuers later called the incident a result of reckless behavior that could have easily been fatal. One of the most chilling accounts comes from a group of experienced explorers who encountered a natural disaster underground. They were inside a cave with a narrow chamber when the earth began to shake. An earthquake reverberated through the rock, dislodging dust and smaller stones, and the cave's stability was suddenly in question. As aftershocks continued, one of the cavers slipped and became trapped between two large rocks. The others clung to the walls and tried to help while the earth kept reminding them that the ground above was not their ally. During those moments, the group faced two dangers at once: the immediate trauma of entrapment and the uncertain stability of the entire cave. They had to move with speed but also with caution. Ropes, tools, and teamwork were their only options. They managed to free their trapped companion through a combination of rope work and cooperative hoisting, then navigated toward the light while aftershocks continued to pelt the exposed openings. Every step was measured. When they finally reached daylight, they left with a new respect for how little control humans have when the earth itself decides to move. Across all these incidents, Two themes repeat: skill can save lives, and rushed action can make things worse. That is why rescue teams rarely act without a plan. When a passage collapses, the right first move is not to start tearing at the rocks with fire in the eyes. It is to secure the area, dig a plan, and shore the opening. Shoring is the construction of temporary supports to prevent further collapse while rescuers work. In confined spaces, the use of a tripod rig above an opening can allow controlled hauling and provide a stable anchor for a system of pulleys. Stretcher systems designed for narrow spaces, like rollable litters that can be threaded through tight passages, let rescuers package an injured person without forcing awkward positions that could worsen internal injuries. Mechanical advantage systems, blocks and pulleys arranged to multiply force, turn what would be overwhelming weight into manageable loads that a disciplined team can handle. The work of experts and volunteers, the kind you see in specialized cave rescue training, is not glamorous. It is not tying, listening, slow lifting, and patience under pressure. Teams practice packaging a patient in confined space litters. They practice building haul systems that allow an injured person to be raised vertically or pulled out sideways. They practice communicating through radios and making decisions about whether to move rock now or shore first. Those choices matter. Proper shoring and measured excavation prevent secondary collapse. Proper packaging prevents worsening spinal or internal injuries. And warming and feeding a trapped person through a small communication gap, food and warm clothing passed through a crack, can be the difference between a rescue and a tragedy because it preserves strength and prevents hypothermia. These stories are not just cautionary tales about what can go wrong. They are also lessons in human response when something goes wrong. People have been willing to fight through frozen limbs and aching backs for hours, to come from miles away with timber and equipment to shore a passage, to fashion ingenious pulley systems that inch a trapped body free. In one rescue, mine workers who knew how to handle timber were indispensable for cutting and installing supports that allowed the passage to be cleared safely. In another, a team used nothing more than webbing and controlled hauling to coax a teenager out of a fissure a few feet at a time. Those are the human details that show what teamwork looks like in small, calm moments amid chaos. When you prepare for caves, there are practical things you can do that reduce the chance you will be in these stories. Always tell someone where you are going and when you plan to be back. Check weather. Caves that flood are sudden and relentless. Bring proper rigging and know how to use it. Never try to widen a passage while others are deeper inside. And if you find yourself trapped, keep your breathing steady, conserve heat, and avoid panicked movements that can make the situation worse. As the light fades on these stories, consider the ripple effects. Rescues can take many hours. They demand people who know how to hold their nerves steady and work slowly under low light. They demand tools and training that are specialized for the space between rock and darkness. And they demand humility from anyone who ventures below because the cave does not yield to impatience. If this video changed how you think about exploration and safety, let me know in the comments which story surprised you most. Would you keep exploring after hearing these rescues, or would you turn back at the first narrow crawl? Tell me one safety habit you think everyone who goes into caves should adopt. If you could talk to a rescuer who has pulled someone from a tight space, what would you ask them? Your answers will shape future videos where I dive deeper into gear, rescue techniques, and how real rescue teams train. Before you go, please do a quick favor. If you found value in these true rescue stories, subscribe now so you won't miss our next deep dive into survival and rescue. Hit like if you want more detailed breakdowns of how rescues actually work, and leave a comment with the question you want answered next. Every thumbs up and comment helps this channel bring more carefully researched stories to people who love the edge between adventure and danger. Thank you for watching. Be curious, be careful, and until next time, keep your light steady.